10 days before the US Open even began, while every headline in tennis was pointed toward Flushing Meadows, a hotel company quietly made a decision that tells you more about where women's tennis is heading than almost anything happening on court. And almost nobody stopped to ask why. Picture New York in the second week of August. Sponsor trucks rolling onto the grounds, hospitality tents rising around Arthur Ashe Stadium, production crews wiring cameras into every corner of the complex. The entire operation slowly transforming into the commercial spectacle that descends on the city every summer, right before the first ball is struck in anger. Now picture the opposite scene happening on the other side of the planet at the exact same moment. Melbourne in the dead of winter, Rod Laver Arena sitting empty and silent. The Australian Open not some looming event, but a full 5 months away. Barely a blip on the calendar for most casual fans. And somewhere in the space between those two images, between a Grand Slam about to start and another one that wrapped up back in January, Marriott's Asia-Pacific division dropped an announcement that on the surface looked almost boring. No blockbuster number attached to a headline, no dramatic unveiling of contract length, no parade of luxury perks designed to go viral. Just a simple statement that Alex Eala had become the face of Marriott Bonvoy's Tennis the World campaign across Asia-Pacific, excluding China. That's it. That's the announcement. But here's what should stop you in your tracks. The timing. Marriott made this move roughly 10 days before the US Open, instead of waiting to see what Alex would do in New York. And if you understand anything about how sponsorship deals typically work, that single detail should feel completely backwards to you. Because the standard playbook in sports marketing almost never works this way. Normally, brands wait. They wait for the breakthrough moment, the trophy lift, the viral clip that gets replayed 1,000,000 times, the ranking jump that makes headlines, the tearful post-match interview that goes everywhere. They let the athlete do the heavy lifting first, let the moment build, let the world fall in love, and only then do the checks start moving. Marriott skipped all of that. It placed its bet early, before the tournament that could have made Alex a household name even started. And when a global hospitality giant commits publicly to a 20-year-old player sitting at number 20 in the world just before the biggest hard-court event of the American summer, the real question isn't how much money changed hands. The real question is what Marriott thinks it understands about Alex that the rest of the sponsorship world hasn't figured out yet. Because this isn't really a story about an athlete signing another endorsement. It's a story about timing, about intention, about a company quietly showing its hand before anyone else in the market even realized there was a hand to be shown. Most of the coverage around this deal will do what coverage always does. Flatten it into the easiest possible narrative. Famous player, famous brand, endorsement announced. Congratulations. Moving on. That version of the story is clean, digestible, forgettable. But it misses the strategic layer sitting right underneath the surface. And more importantly, it might miss the clearest signal yet about where Alex's career, and specifically her commercial career, is actually headed over the next several years, not just over the next couple of tournaments. Here's the thing about contracts. You can negotiate the value up or down. You can shorten or extend the length. You can dress up the benefits package to sound as luxurious as you want. A press release can make almost any deal sound massive if the language is polished enough. But the one thing that can never be rewritten after the fact is the date. The moment a company chooses to step in, publicly, with its name attached, is frozen in time. And that moment tells you things that no benefits list ever could. Timing reveals conviction. Timing reveals appetite for risk. Timing tells you whether a company is chasing momentum that already exists in the marketplace or trying to get ahead of momentum before everyone else catches on. Marriott chose an extremely specific moment to move on Alex. And once you understand that moment, you understand more about what this company believes she represents than any unverified number floating around social media ever will. So let's rewind, because the background here actually matters a lot. Alex is 20 years old, from the Philippines, and turned professional back in 2020 after spending her formative years training at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca. Even before this summer, she wasn't some unknown name suddenly appearing out of nowhere. She already had a dedicated fan base, growing recognition on tour, and a ranking that had been climbing steadily for a while. What changed everything was a 6-week stretch that completely rewrote the conversation around her. It started at Wimbledon, where she took down defending champion Iga Swiatek in the third round, winning 7-6, 6-2 on center court, in full view of millions of tennis fans around the world. That's not a result you bury. That's the kind of match that gets clipped, shared, replayed, and talked about for weeks, because it combines the most iconic stage in the sport with the shock value of a rising player toppling a reigning champion. Then came Washington. At the DC Open in early August, Alex put together the single best tournament run of her career, beating Jessica Pegula, Elina Svitolina, and Naomi Osaka on her way to her first WTA singles title. Let that sink in for a second. Pegula, Svitolina, Osaka. 3 legitimate, accomplished names, all beaten back-to-back-to-back by a 20-year-old on her way to a maiden title. In doing so, she became the first Filipino player ever to win a WTA singles championship. When the rankings updated on August 4th, one day after she lifted that trophy, she climbed to world number 20, the best ranking of her career, and reportedly the highest position ever reached by a Filipino player on either the men's or women's professional tour. 6 days later, Marriott made its announcement. Sit with those dates for a moment, because they tell you exactly where the market stood the instant Marriott decided to move. And this is where things start looking genuinely unusual if you dig even slightly beneath the surface. Start with the first contradiction. If Marriott's primary goal was simply to ride whatever wave Alex might create at the US Open, the timing makes no sense at all. The obvious strategic move would have been to wait. Let her reach the second week. Let her make a quarterfinal run. Let her knock off another big name on American soil. Let her create one unforgettable New York moment. And then drop the partnership announcement into a media environment that's already buzzing louder than ever. Brands do this constantly because the tournament hands them free momentum on a silver platter. Marriott didn't wait for any of that. Even stranger, the announcement didn't come directly off a win at all. Her most recent result heading into the deal had actually been a 4th-round loss to Belinda Bencic up in Canada, a defeat. And yet, buried inside even that loss was another signal worth paying attention to. The Toronto night session featuring Alex reportedly sold around 3,100 tickets in under 30 minutes once her appearance was announced. Hold on to that number because it hints at exactly the kind of data companies are quietly tracking that traditional tennis commentary almost never talks about. Still, the bigger point stands. Marriott acted before New York, before any possible US Open breakthrough. And that wasn't an accident. That was a decision. Now here's the second oddity, and this one's even harder to explain away. The campaign Alex is fronting is literally called Tennis the World. Yet its most important Grand Slam tie-in isn't the US Open, isn't Wimbledon, isn't Roland Garros. It's the Australian Open, where Marriott Bonvoy is entering its 6th consecutive year as an official hotel partner. The 2027 Australian Open is scheduled for January 11th through January 31st. And one of the headline benefits being promoted through Bonvoy membership is early access to tickets for that exact tournament. Think about what that actually means. Marriott takes a 20-year-old player who is riding an enormous wave of attention during the American hardcourt summer and ties her to a campaign whose central activation point sits in Melbourne, roughly 5 months in the future. Why? Why build the entire campaign around a tournament that isn't even on the immediate horizon? And then there's a third detail that raises even more questions. Marriott didn't simply label Alex as its Asia-Pacific ambassador in a general sense. The company specifically and repeatedly uses the phrase Asia-Pacific, excluding China. That exclusion is not a minor footnote. China represents one of the largest tennis markets on the entire continent by nearly every commercial measure you could name. Massive audiences, major tournaments, significant sponsorship dollars, a substantial chunk of the WTA calendar itself runs through China. If a company genuinely wanted one player to represent tennis across the broadest possible version of Asia-Pacific, including China, would seem like the obvious move. Marriott very deliberately does not do that. Instead, Alex's assigned territory centers on Southeast Asia, South Asia, Oceania, Japan, and South Korea, while China sits completely outside the boundary. So why draw that specific line? And then comes a fourth clue, one that's gotten buried under a flood of exaggerated claims circulating online since the announcement dropped. Marriott's official materials do not disclose a contract value. Not a single figure. Contract value. Not a single figure. The company never says she's earning $2 million annually. Never confirms unlimited first-class travel. Never announces some outrageous $287 million package, a number that somehow started floating around social media with zero sourcing behind it. None of those claims appear anywhere in Marriott's actual announcement, in the campaign materials, or in any credible business reporting on the partnership. What Marriott does publicly emphasize are benefits aimed at its own Bonvoy members: Australian Open ticket access, Marriott Bonvoy Moments experiences, exclusive member perks tied to Alex's profile. That distinction matters more than it might seem at first glance. The public-facing structure of this deal isn't built around showcasing what Alex personally receives from Marriott. It's built around showcasing what Marriott's own customers get through their connection to her, which raises the far more interesting question buried under all four of these clues. Why is Marriott working so hard to bring its members closer to Alex? Rather than simply slapping her face next to a hotel logo and calling it a day? Put those four pieces together: the pre-tournament timing, the Australian Open focus, the China exclusion, and the member-first benefit structure, and the standard sponsorship narrative starts falling apart. The typical story goes something like this. Athlete becomes popular. Brand notices, brand pays, athlete lends visibility. Everyone moves on. That's probably part of what's happening here, sure. But it doesn't explain the specificity, the precision, the deliberate boundaries drawn around this particular deal. A more accurate way to understand it might be this. Marriott isn't primarily buying exposure from a rising tennis star. Marriott appears to be using Alex as a credible, culturally resonant bridge into a strategically vital consumer region. Tennis becomes the vehicle. Alex becomes the emotional and cultural connective tissue. The actual business objective looks like deeper Bonvoy adoption among travelers across the specific slice of Asia-Pacific, where the company clearly wants aggressive loyalty growth. Once you view the deal through that lens, everything clicks into place. Marriott doesn't need Alex to win another Grand Slam-level match for this strategy to succeed, because the company isn't purchasing a single tournament's worth of hype. It's investing in the idea that she can become a durable, long-term regional sports figure. The Australian Open connection suddenly makes total sense, because geographically and culturally, it's the slam closest to millions of Southeast Asian travelers. The China exclusion makes sense too, because the campaign's boundaries mirror precisely the markets Marriott wants to target through an entirely separate strategy. And the heavy emphasis on member benefits makes sense because customer enrollment and loyalty engagement appear to be the actual endgame here, not simple brand association. There are at least 3 pieces of evidence that support this reading, and once you hear them laid out, the pattern becomes almost impossible to ignore. The first is the calendar itself, especially when you compare it to one of the most talked-about sponsorship explosions in recent tennis history. Remember what happened after Emma Raducanu won the 2021 US Open as a qualifier? Brands didn't just show up, they flooded in. Within weeks and months, she was suddenly linked to Tiffany, Dior, Vodafone, Evian, British Airways, Porsche, HSBC, and a long list of other global names. Every single one of those companies entered after the breakthrough had already happened. They bought in at peak attention, at maximum post-US Open pricing, when her name was on every front page in the world. For years afterward, marketing analysts debated whether too much commercial value had been stacked onto a single extraordinary 2-week run, before anyone actually knew whether the results would hold up long-term. And people have already started drawing comparisons between that Raducanu sponsorship rush and what's happening with Alex right now. But Marriott took the opposite approach entirely. Instead of waiting to see if Alex could produce another viral New York moment, potentially watching her price multiply overnight, the company acted while she was sitting at number 20 before the tournament had even started. That's not a bet on one explosive fortnight. That looks much more like a bet on the underlying sustainable market forming around this specific athlete. The second piece of evidence is hiding in plain sight, buried inside the corporate language of the announcement itself. Marriott's chief commercial officer for Asia Pacific, excluding China, John Toomey, didn't build his public comments around future trophies or hypothetical ranking milestones. Instead, his language centered on qualities like authenticity, inspiration, and, crucially, Alex's connection to the specific region Marriott serves. That last part is the phrase worth circling. Corporate statements are almost always polished to the point of meaninglessness, but executives tend to reveal their actual priorities through exactly what they choose to highlight. Toomey could have easily framed Alex as a future Grand Slam champion in waiting. He could have leaned entirely into her recent on-court results. Instead, the emphasis fell on regional connection. That kind of language lines up far more closely with a long-term market strategy than with a simple, transactional, performance-based endorsement. Tennis gets Marriott attention, sure, but regional identity is what gives that attention actual relevance. And this specific region happens to be one Marriott has repeatedly flagged as absolutely central to the future of its loyalty business. Which brings us to the third and strongest piece of evidence: Marriott's own internal research. Earlier in 2026, Marriott Bonvoy published loyalty trend data covering Asia Pacific, excluding China, and notice something important there: that's the exact same regional definition used in Alex's ambassador announcement. That's not a coincidence. According to that research, 89% of travelers surveyed across that region participated in at least one loyalty program, with the figure climbing all the way to 96% in Vietnam. Think about what those numbers actually reveal. Marriott isn't trying to introduce the basic concept of travel loyalty programs to some unfamiliar population. Quite the opposite. This is a market already deeply conditioned to join programs, chase perks, compare experiences across competing brands, and reward whichever company earns the strongest emotional connection. In an environment like that, the real battle isn't teaching people what loyalty programs are. It's convincing them to choose your ecosystem over every other option competing for their attention. And into that exact battlefield, Marriott installs a 20-year-old Filipino athlete whose popularity is exploding across precisely that broader geographic footprint, and positions her as the face of its tennis campaign. Suddenly, the entire structure snaps into focus with almost mechanical precision. Move before another slam has a chance to reset her commercial price. Define her territory using the identical regional boundary your own market research is built around. Choose someone whose personal identity is naturally rooted in Southeast Asia, with a fan base extending well beyond the Philippines thanks to a large diaspora community and a rapidly growing international following. Tie the campaign directly to the slam that's easiest for most of Asia Pacific to actually engage with, given geography and time zones. Then make one of the headline campaign perks early Australian Open access specifically for Bonvoy members. Now picture the actual consumer journey Marriott is engineering here. Someone living in Manila, Singapore, Bangkok, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Seoul, or Tokyo wants to watch Alex compete at the Grand Slam most accessible to them, both geographically and emotionally. Marriott can connect that very human desire directly to Bonvoy membership, to ticket access, to hotel stays, to curated experiences, to deeper loyalty engagement across its entire portfolio. From a pure business standpoint, that's not really a conventional athlete endorsement anymore. That's closer to a full customer acquisition funnel with Alex sitting right at the top of it, drawing people in, while Bonvoy sits waiting at the bottom as the actual destination. And once you see that funnel clearly, all four of those confusing details stop being confusing at all. They become interlocking pieces of one coherent strategy, and that strategy doesn't even have to be read cynically. In fact, there's a genuinely generous way to interpret all of this. Companies don't typically build multi-year customer acquisition strategies around personalities they expect to fade out of relevance within 6 months. If Marriott is positioning Alex this specific way, it suggests the company genuinely believes her appeal can survive individual wins and losses on court. It suggests they're not betting narrowly on her becoming a Grand Slam champion next month. They're betting that years from now, she'll still be one of the athletes most closely associated with a rapidly growing audience Marriott desperately wants to reach. In a strange way, that's actually a bigger compliment than simply rewarding someone for a trophy they already lifted. It's a bet on who she might become, not just a payment for who she already is. But let's pump the brakes here for a second, because there are real limits to what this evidence actually proves, and those limits matter just as much as the pattern itself. Nothing here proves Marriott somehow predicted exactly what Alex would do at the US Open. Her actual result in New York was solid, respectable, but not transformational.